A year after Malcolm-Jamal Warner died suddenly in Costa Rica, the silence around his final days has finally begun to break. For months, his wife, Tenisha Warner, kept the deepest parts of her grief away from the public. While millions remembered the actor who had grown up in front of them as Theo Huxtable, Tanisha was living a completely different reality, trying to understand how a husband could be there one moment and gone the next, while she still had to wake up every morning and raise their young daughter. Then, 1 year after Malcolm's death, Tanisha finally began speaking publicly about what that loss had done to her family. What really happened during those final moments in Costa Rica? What was Tanisha experiencing behind the scenes while the world mourned Malcolm? Why did she remain largely private for so long? And why, 1 year later, did she finally decide that she was ready to speak? To understand why her words carry so much weight, you have to understand the man she lost. Not simply the television character millions knew, but the person Malcolm-Jamal Warner became after childhood fame. Because long before the tragedy, there was a boy from Jersey City who had no idea that one acting workshop would change the direction of his entire life. Malcolm-Jamal Warner was born in Jersey City, New Jersey. He was raised primarily in Los Angeles by his mother, Pamela Warner, and he developed an interest in performing when he was still a child. According to an interview preserved by the Television Academy, Warner recalled being about 9 years old when he joined an acting workshop in Inglewood. His first stage performance was in a production called Alice, Is That You?, where he played the Tin Man. The reaction from the audience made an impression on him. He realized that performing was something he genuinely wanted to pursue. By his early teenage years, that interest had become a career. He appeared on television programs including Matt Houston and Fame. Then came the opportunity that would define his childhood: The Cosby Show. Warner was cast as Theo Huxtable, the middle child and only son of Cliff and Claire Huxtable. The series became one of the biggest television shows of its era, and Warner spent 8 seasons growing up in front of an enormous audience. Theo was funny, sometimes immature, sometimes stubborn, and constantly learning. But behind the character was a young performer who was developing his own discipline and understanding of the business. The role brought Warner an Emmy nomination in 1986 for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series. He was still a teenager. For many child actors, that kind of fame can become a trap. Warner worked to make sure it did not become his entire identity. He directed episodes of The Cosby Show while still young, and after the sitcom ended, he continued building a career that moved far beyond Theo Huxtable. In the 1990s, he starred alongside Eddie Griffin in Malcolm and Eddie. He continued acting, directing and producing, appearing in projects such as The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Touched by an Angel, The Tuskegee Airmen, and other television and film productions. Later came Read Between the Lines, where he played Dr. Alex Reed, and eventually The Resident, where he became known to a new generation as Dr. A.J. Austin, also called The Raptor. There was another side of Warner that television audiences did not always see. He was a musician, a bass player, a poet. His band Miles Long combined jazz funk with spoken word, and Warner released music independently. In 2015, he won a Grammy as part of Robert Glasper Experiment's recording of Jesus Children. Years later, his spoken word project Hiding in Plain View earned a Grammy nomination. The creative work mattered to him because acting was never the only way he wanted to communicate. Warner once explained that poetry and music gave him another voice, one that allowed him to express things he could not necessarily express through acting or directing. That distinction became important when looking back at his life. Because Malcolm-Jamal Warner had spent decades being visible without necessarily making his private life public. He could walk into a room and be recognized instantly. People knew Theo. They knew his television roles. They knew the actor, director, poet, and musician. But much less was known about Malcolm, the husband and father. Warner married Tanisha in 2022, and together they had a daughter. Their family life was largely kept away from the spotlight. That privacy was deliberate, and it meant that much of what their relationship actually looked like remained theirs. There were no constant public updates. No attempt to turn their family into entertainment. Instead, Warner continued working while protecting a part of his life from the same public attention that had followed him since childhood. That made what happened in July 2025 even more difficult for the people closest to him. At 54, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was no longer the teenage actor audiences remembered from the 1980s. He was a husband, a father, a working artist who had spent more than 4 decades building a life beyond the role that made him famous. And then, During a family vacation in Costa Rica, everything changed. The man who had spent his life growing up in front of America would suddenly become the subject of headlines around the world. But the public was about to learn only the basic facts. For Tanisha and their daughter, there was no distance between the headline and the reality. There was only the moment when their family became a family without Malcolm. And the next chapter would begin with a question no career achievement could answer. How do you survive the day after losing the person who was supposed to be there for the rest of your life? July 2025 was supposed to be a family vacation. For Malcolm-Jamal Warner, it was a chance to step away from the cameras and spend time with the people who mattered most. He was in Costa Rica with his family, including his young daughter, when a routine day near the ocean turned into a catastrophe. On July 20th, Warner was at Playa Cockles on Costa Rica's Caribbean coast. Public accounts from authorities and witnesses indicate that he entered the water and was caught in a strong current. What happened next unfolded quickly. According to Costa Rican authorities, several people in the group experienced difficulty in the water. Warner's daughter was also caught in the situation and was rescued by people nearby. Reports indicate that surfers and other bystanders helped bring her safely back toward shore. Warner, however, was pulled farther into the water. The rescue effort continued. People on the beach searched for him. A doctor who was nearby entered the water to help locate him. Warner was eventually brought back to shore unconscious. Emergency responders were called. According to Costa Rican Red Cross information reported at the time, CPR was performed for an extended period, but Warner could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 54 years old. There was no mystery about the fundamental cause of what happened. Costa Rica's Judicial Investigation Department determined that Warner had been caught by a strong current. His autopsy confirmed death from accidental asphyxia by submersion, essentially drowning. That distinction matters because the tragedy has sometimes been surrounded by speculation online. But the confirmed record does not support a secret cause of death. It was a drowning accident. The circumstances were horrifying precisely because they were so sudden. Warner had spent more than 4 decades working in entertainment. He had survived the difficult transition from child actor to adult performer. He had built a career outside the role that made him famous. He had become a husband and father. And then, within minutes, his family was facing a reality that could not be reversed. The news traveled quickly through Hollywood. Former colleagues, fellow performers and fans began sharing memories of Warner. For many people, his death felt strangely personal because they had watched him grow up. Millions had first known him as Theo Huxtable. They had watched him as a teenager. Then they saw him become a man. And suddenly, they were being asked to accept that he was gone. The response from the entertainment industry reflected how much ground Warner had covered during his career. He had acted, directed, written, performed music and poetry, and continued working long after the television series that made him famous had ended. Reuters noted his Emmy recognition, his NAACP Image Award-winning work, and his Grammy win. But none of those accomplishments could change what Tanisha and their daughter were facing. Their loss was not an abstract Hollywood tragedy. It was the loss of a husband and a father. And that difference would become increasingly important as the months passed. Tanisha had always been protective of her family's privacy. Malcolm had also kept his wife and daughter largely outside the public spotlight. Their daughter was not raised as a celebrity child for the world to follow. So when Malcolm died, Tanisha did not immediately turn her grief into public statements. She largely stepped back. The world wanted answers, memories, and photographs. Tanisha had something much more difficult to deal with. She had a child who had lost her father, and she had lost her husband. Those are 2 different kinds of grief happening inside the same home. In the months after the drowning, Tanisha began finding ways to keep Malcolm's memory connected to the life they had built together. She eventually became more visible publicly, including through the Warner Family Foundation, established in his memory. The foundation has focused on supporting children and families while also helping continue causes connected to Malcolm's interests. She also developed River and Ember, another project tied to emotional support and the well-being of families. These efforts were not simply about preserving the name of a famous actor. They reflected something more personal. Malcolm had spent his life creating. Tanisha was trying to create something out of the space his death had left behind. But grief does not follow the schedule of a foundation, a business, or a public tribute. A year can pass on a calendar without the person you lost becoming any less absent. There are still ordinary mornings. There are birthdays. There are family routines. There are moments when a child wants to tell her father something and suddenly remembers that he cannot answer. And there are anniversaries. By the summer of 2026, Tanisha had begun allowing the public to see more of what that year had actually been like. She spoke about Malcolm not as a television icon, but as the person who had been beside her in private. She talked about their daughter. She talked about grief. And she talked about the reality that surviving someone's death does not mean leaving that person behind. That was the part of her story the public had never really been able to see. For the first year, most people knew Malcolm's death through reports from Costa Rica. They knew the location. They knew the age. They knew the official cause. They knew that his daughter had survived. But they did not know what it looked like inside the home after everyone else stopped talking about the tragedy. They did not know what Tanisha had been carrying. And they did not know how she was trying to help a child understand the permanent absence of her father while she was still struggling to understand it herself. Then came the one-year anniversary, and Tanisha finally decided to speak. Her appearance on CBS Mornings brought her grief into public view in a way she had largely avoided before. She discussed Malcolm's life, their daughter, and the enormous challenge of moving forward without him. But perhaps the most important thing about her words was what she did not claim. She did not reveal a hidden cause of death. She did not contradict the official investigation. She did not present some secret explanation for what happened in Costa Rica. Instead, she described what happened afterward, the emotional consequences, the parenting, the memories, the struggle to live with a loss that cannot be repaired. And as the anniversary approached, another part of the story was beginning to emerge. It was not happening on a beach. It was not happening in Hollywood. It was happening in courtrooms and legal documents. Because while Tanisha was trying to protect her daughter and preserve Malcolm's memory, questions about the actor's estate had begun creating a new conflict inside the family. What was Malcolm's financial plan for his wife and daughter? What had he intended to change? What obligations remained unfinished when he died? And why did Tanisha ultimately believe that she had no choice but to take legal action? Those questions would turn a private family tragedy into a public legal dispute. And 1 year after Malcolm's death, Tanisha was finally ready to explain what the public had never seen. The grief was only the beginning. 1 year after Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death, Tenisha Warner finally allowed the public to see something it had not seen before. Not the actress's widow standing beside a photograph. Not a carefully written tribute. Not a publicist's statement. But a wife and mother trying to explain what it actually means to survive a death that still feels impossible. When Tanisha sat down with Gayle King for CBS Mornings in July 2026, the interview had been recorded before the estate lawsuit became public. That timing is important, because the interview was primarily about grief, not money. And what Tanisha described was far more personal than anything the headlines had suggested. She said July 20th, 2025, the day Malcolm died, was the worst day of her life. But even a year later, she said the experience remained difficult to process. She explained that the moments surrounding Malcolm's death were so deeply embedded in her body that revisiting them could become overwhelming. She also acknowledged that she could not remember every detail of that day. That does not establish a hidden event. It does not change the official cause of death. It shows something else. How traumatic the experience remained for the person who lived through it. Malcolm had been there, and then he wasn't. Tanisha was suddenly raising their daughter without the person who had been her partner in parenting. And that changed the meaning of every ordinary day. She described her emotional capacity as limited at times. Her priority was her daughter, and then herself. That statement revealed something important about the year that had passed. There was no neat transition from devastation to recovery. There was simply survival. Tanisha rejected the idea that she and her daughter could simply move on. For them, Malcolm remained part of their everyday lives. That distinction became one of the central themes of her public message. Moving on suggests leaving something behind. Tanisha was describing something different. Moving with the grief. Carrying it. Learning how to live around an absence that never stops being an absence. For a child, that process can be especially complicated. Malcolm's daughter was still young when he died. She had known her father as a person, not as Theo Huxtable, not as the actor strangers recognized at airports, and not as the musician who had won a Grammy. To her, he was simply Dad. and Tanisha was now responsible for helping her daughter grow up while carrying her own grief at the same time. That meant remembering Malcolm in ordinary ways. It meant continuing family traditions. It meant making room for him in conversations. And it meant finding ways for their daughter to remain connected to a father who could no longer physically be there. One of the clearest examples came on August 18, 2026. It would have been Malcolm's 56th birthday. Tanisha and their daughter continued a tradition they had shared with Malcolm, celebrating his birthday at home. This time, however, he was missing. Tanisha shared an emotional tribute showing their daughter surrounded by dolls and stuffed animals, recreating the kind of intimate family birthday Malcolm had enjoyed. She wrote about the pain of celebrating without him and described that pain as evidence of how deeply she had loved him. It was a simple family tradition. But after death, simple traditions can become some of the most painful things to preserve. A birthday cake can become a reminder. A chair at the table can become a reminder. A favorite joke can become a reminder. And for Tanisha, remembering Malcolm was not only about mourning him. It was about making sure their daughter would continue knowing who her father was. That became part of the reason behind the projects Tanisha created after his death. The Warner Family Foundation was established in Malcolm's honor, with an emphasis on children, families, and creative development. She also launched River and Ember, a storytelling initiative designed to help families communicate about difficult emotions and grief. Those projects fit closely with the parts of Malcolm's life that had existed away from television. He had always been interested in creativity, poetry, music, and self-expression. Tanisha's work after his death was therefore not simply about putting his name on an organization. It was an attempt to continue something they had valued together. But while Tanisha was publicly talking about grief, another story was developing privately. And eventually, it entered the courts. The dispute concerned Malcolm's estate. On July 20, 2026, the first anniversary of his death, Tanisha filed legal action involving the Warner Family Trust, naming Malcolm's mother, Pamela Warner, in her capacity as successor trustee. According to the legal claims reported by multiple outlets, Tanisha sought more than $1.2 million, arguing that obligations connected to the couple's premarital agreement had not been fulfilled. This is where the story becomes complicated. Because Tanisha was not alleging that Malcolm secretly left behind some unknown fortune that someone had stolen. Her legal argument was more specific. She claimed that Malcolm had agreed to provide certain financial protections under their premarital agreement, but that some of those obligations had not been completed before his unexpected death. Among the reported claims was a $1 million life insurance obligation. Tanisha alleges that Malcolm had been required to obtain a policy naming her as beneficiary, but that the policy was never put into place. The lawsuit also reportedly includes claims involving anniversary payments, retirement contributions, and compensation connected to her work for Malcolm. Reports have put the total claimed amount at approximately $1.2 million, with one account citing a figure of $1,276,042 before additional interest and legal costs. But those are allegations in litigation. They are not findings that Malcolm or his mother intentionally violated the agreement. That distinction is critical. Tanisha's position is that she is entitled to money she says Malcolm had promised under their agreement. The legal dispute centers on whether those obligations were satisfied and what responsibility, if any, the trust has for them. There is another major element. Tanisha has said Malcolm intended to update his estate plan. The existing Warner Family Trust dates back to 1996, when Malcolm was only 26 years old, long before he met Tanisha and long before their daughter was born. According to Tanisha, Malcolm had been working toward replacing that older estate plan with one that reflected the family he had later created. But he died before those changes were completed. That timing became crucial, because intentions are not always legally equivalent to completed documents. A person can tell family members what he plans to do. He can meet with advisors. He can begin changing paperwork. But if the required legal steps are not completed before death, an unfinished plan can create enormous problems. Tanisha's claim is that Malcolm intended to provide for her and their daughter, and that she had spent the year trying to resolve the matter privately. In a statement reported by People, she said she had attempted to settle the complicated estate privately while honoring what she believed were Malcolm's final wishes. She also said she was struggling to care for their daughter as a single mother, and that she felt she had no choice but to take legal action before potential statutes of limitation expired. That is Tanisha's position. But Pamela Warner has offered a different account. In August 2026, Pamela spoke publicly amid the dispute and denied the suggestion that she had attempted to prevent financial support from reaching her granddaughter. Pamela said Malcolm had made extensive plans for his family and that separate provisions existed for Tanisha and their daughter. She also emphasized that although the trust structure favored other relatives, Malcolm intended for his daughter to be provided for, and there was a significant development involving the child. Pamela said a settlement had been reached with the legal representatives for Malcolm's daughter, with the agreement still awaiting court approval. According to People's reporting, the proposed arrangement would allow Malcolm's daughter to receive the majority of the estate. Again, this needs to be understood for what it is. A reported settlement is not the same thing as a final judicial ruling, and a dispute between adults should not automatically be interpreted as a dispute over whether Malcolm's daughter was loved or wanted. Both sides have described their actions in terms of protecting the family. Tanisha says she is protecting her legal rights and providing for her daughter. Pamela says Malcolm had already made extensive plans and that his daughter was intended to be cared for. Those positions are now part of a legal record, and they exist alongside the grief that brought the family to this point. Perhaps that is what makes this story so painful. Malcolm's death was accidental. The estate conflict was not. It emerged afterward, in the complicated space between old legal documents, later promises, family expectations, and the practical realities of raising a child after the death of a parent. And Tanisha has had to deal with all of it while grieving the same man at the center of the dispute. That is why her CBS interview matters. Because when she spoke to Gayle King, the focus was not on the lawsuit. It was on Malcolm. She talked about the fact that his presence still exists in their home. She talked about their daughter. She talked about how grief changes a person's capacity to function. And she talked about continuing forward without pretending that the loss had disappeared. The interview also offered a glimpse into the complicated relationship between Tanisha and Malcolm's family. When King asked about her contact with Pamela, Tanisha did not offer a simple answer. She acknowledged that everyone connected to Malcolm was grieving, but emphasized that her immediate responsibility was her daughter. Her answer reflected how narrow her world had become. First her child, then herself. Everything else had to wait. And that may be the most revealing part of what Tanisha has said 1 year after Malcolm's death. The public had spent a year asking what happened to Malcolm. Tanisha was living with a different question. What happens to the people who remain? For Malcolm's daughter, the answer will unfold over decades. She will grow older without her father physically present. She will hear stories about his childhood. She will discover his music. She will watch scenes from the Cosby Show and see a young version of the man she knew as Dad. She will eventually understand that millions of strangers loved a character her father played. But her memories will be different. She will remember the private man. The father who celebrated birthdays at home. The man whose absence changed the structure of her family. And Tanisha will be the person helping preserve those memories. That is why the organizations she created matter. That is why the birthday traditions matter. That is why speaking publicly after months of privacy mattered. Tanisha did not come forward to reveal that Malcolm's death had been something other than an accident. The official cause remains accidental drowning following the Costa Rica incident. She came forward to explain what the accident actually left behind. A child. A grieving mother. A family trying to negotiate both memory and responsibility. And now, a legal dispute that has forced private questions into public view. 1 year after Malcolm-Jamal Warner's death, the story is therefore no longer simply about how he died. It is about what his absence did to the people who loved him. It is about a wife who spent a year trying to keep her family together while carrying a loss she says still feels like the worst day of her life. It is about a daughter growing up with memories of a father who will never get to watch her become an adult. It is about a mother who says she is trying to honor her son's intentions while defending the estate arrangements already in place. And it is about the difficult reality that grief and legal responsibility can exist in the same family at the same time. Malcolm-Jamal Warner spent his life being recognized for the person he played on television. But behind Theo Huxtable was another man. A husband. A father. A musician. A poet. A creative person who had spent decades building a life beyond the character that made him famous. And perhaps that is what Tanisha's decision to finally speak has made clear. The most important part of Malcolm's story was never the television set. It was the family waiting for him when the cameras were gone. That family is still here. Still grieving. Still raising his daughter. Still celebrating his birthday. still building projects inspired by the values they shared, and still trying to resolve the complicated questions left behind by a death that came without warning. Malcolm's life ended suddenly in Costa Rica. But for Tanisha and their daughter, the story did not end on that beach. It continued the next morning, and the morning after that. 1 year later, they are still learning how to live with the space he left behind. And that may be the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the most shocking part of a celebrity death is not the moment the world loses the star. It is everything the family has to live through after the cameras have gone away.